Hey traders, welcome to the final monthly equity watch list for the year. Starting off with the S&P, as you can see, we remain kind of bearish over the short term, looking for that C wave back down towards this 3520, maybe as low as 3500 region before we see continuation to the upside. And we're kind of matching that with some of the FX markets, with the euro and the pound pulling back as of today. So we're looking for this to continue to the downside, get that little slow chop back down towards the 3500 region, and then we can buy that to the upside. Lower time frames, you can see how the MACD divergence has really kicked in all the way through, and we're just waiting for a turn. Potentially, we've already seen that turn to the downside. So in terms of looking for a trade, I think an entry order below these lows is not such a bad idea. If we look at this little trend line, a break of that trend line would be fairly significant given where we're sitting in the structure. So looking for that trade down to, like I said, the 3500 region. As we can see, XPX showing the exact same thing, where we're looking for this big trade, or not a big trade, but a little bit of a pullback in this market down towards 3560 to 3500 before continuation to the upside. So as the S&P does, just takes a long time to move, and once it eventually does, we would see a nice big move to the downside. So just have to be patient. Looking at the NASDAQ QQQ, not much to be said. I think we're going to be here for a while. We've been saying for basically the last 2 months, we're going to be sitting in a sideways trading pattern with the S&P for pretty much the rest of the year and early next year. So expecting the same thing moving forward. Potentially one more pullback down here towards 2820, and then another push up, and then a kickback. So we're still looking at the market as that for now, but still early days as to the real clarity that we're seeing in the structure. We see better clarity in individual stocks like Facebook, Apple, the DJI. I'm looking for the same thing. I don't think this is a triangle. I think we are going to see a pullback pretty much lined up with the S&P down towards 2900, potentially get some legs and close this gap at 2845 before we see some upside. So like the S&P, I'm expecting some bearish price action moving forward. The Russell has kind of just run away by itself. So in essence, we are approaching that level where we are going to look for a decent corrective structure, maybe a little bit more upside, and then we should see a decent correction in this area before probably continuation to the upside. So just waiting for something in this area, maybe a little bit more upside, then a corrective structure, then more upside from there. So nothing really in it for me in terms of Russell. We've come a long way. If you're in the trade and you took this running flat, you've done very well. Really nice, clean trading. And now it's looking to time to start taking profits in this region before we see a bigger corrective structure. Facebook pretty much behaving as planned. Nice little ABCDE expanding triangle. We were looking for a push back up towards the highs at 304. We started to see that push, and we should continue to see that push over the coming days before we see a fall to the downside. At the very least, we want to break these highs at around about 300 before we see the C wave kick in and pull back down towards the lows here at 250. Apple, pretty much the same thing, seeing a nice little push up. We got our nice little running flat and continuation on the very lower time frames. And now we just want to wait for a push to at least 125, but more than likely get up into this 132 to 136 region before we see a pullback. So like we said, tech stocks showing pretty much the same thing. Amazon a little bit different, still showing a little bit of confusion as to what we're looking at, patiently waiting to see where this plays out. But at the moment, still looking at a triangle, A, B, C, D, E. But then again, we need to be here for much longer than this correction has been stated. So we need to probably see a complex corrective structure forming before we see any real price action that is worth trading. You're probably going to see a pullback down here, then a push up from there, and that's going to be your central structure. And then you're still going to have to see some up and down trades in this range before this entire structure breaks out. So this is the kind of price action I'm expecting in Apple. It's just going to be really long, drawn out, choppy price action. So really nothing to trade, at least for the next few weeks, maybe something towards the end of next month where we can start to see some bigger waves that are worth trading. But for now, on the sidelines, and even then, this isn't even a clear structure as to what we're going to see. So waiting patiently, pretty much the same as Microsoft. There's no clarity as to what we're seeing here. We're still in a little bit of a confusing space, and we're just waiting patiently for direction. Netflix, I still think we're going to see a little bit more downside to break these lows at 45 or 456, 460, somewhere there, before we see an up move and then a break, corrective structure. Then we'll look for our longs. So for now, I think we're going to be here a while. And even on the lower time frames, we can see that this little corrective structure is fairly complex. So we should see a move down to 460, a move back up towards 500, 510, and then move down. So we're going to be here for a while still. Google still marching on regardless of the structure. I still think we need to see downside. We're starting to see some MACD divergence and a little bit of momentum dying off. I don't really know what's holding up this market compared to the others, but we should really start to see some downside following what we've seen of late. So I remain bearish Google. Alexion Pharmaceuticals, we were looking at this to complete a little bit of corrective structure for continuation to the upside. We thought we may have seen the lows in this region, but we saw another low early last week, or late last week. So now we're waiting for a remaining, we remain bullish basically for continuation to the upside. I still think the structure is holding up. A little bit confusing as to what we're looking at, but we should see a continuation to the upside. And like we said, entry order above the highs is really the way to play this for now. So picture remains the same. Advanced micro devices finally reached our area that we were looking for a pullback, and we had a fairly decent close. As you can see, pretty bullish or bearish close following 2nd of December's close. So we're waiting for a bit of downside momentum, waiting to see what this little up move is showing, but entry order below these lows is definitely worth looking at. As you can see, you could probably get a 5-6 to 1 out of this as we trade back down toward the lows at 72.50. The structure is still holding up really nicely, still looking really good. It's kind of exactly like Apple, just a little bit more advanced in Apple. If you go back to Apple, you can see it's the same thing. You have this push up, choppy move down, and then you want to push up into this area. And if we go into AMD, you see we pushed up, choppy move down, and we did push up into this area. Now we're waiting for a turn to the downside. So still patiently waiting for that, and we should get that over the next few days if the rest of the market is in line with what we're seeing. Boeing, interesting that we went to break the highs. Now we have a little bit more clarity as to the structure. So what I think we have been looking at is a little bit of a zigzag B wave somewhere in there, impulse down, A, B, C, and then a push down, which gives you your zigzag corrective structure, your zigzag B wave, and now you're seeing the C wave to the upside. So it's been really confusing. You don't really get zigzag flat patterns like this too often. So it's been a bit confusing, and you should see a move up towards 289-ish before we see any other price action. So there's not really much to trade in this. It's one of those trades where it just was too confusing. In hindsight, yes, we should have gone long at 141, but in hindsight, it's always easy to see it. The structure is very confusing. We don't often see, like we said, impulse up and a B wave that ends as a zigzag, then a continuation to the upside. So if you are looking for trade, you want to look for longs, but as you've seen, it's been quite a strong impulse to the upside, and you want to see something corrective before you look for a long trade in Boeing. Baba, I still think more downside to come. We've been chopping around this region for a while now. Looks corrective for more downside. It's just going to take a while to play out. So probably the next few weeks in this kind of region, in this range between 280, 250, and then continuation to the downside from there. Beyond Meat looks like it's correcting. If you go to the very lower time frames, you can see it looks a lot like it's correcting for continuation to the upside. So we did have two options on this trade. We were either going to see a push above this gap, the trade we said we should have taken, or you should have taken, and trade continuation gone to break even now, and or this was going to close the gap and then push down towards this gap before seeing continuation. And it looks like option one is the case, where we're going to just see continuation to the upside. Although with the broader market looking slightly bearish, we may still see downside. So basically, you want your entry order here at break even, and you can probably put an entry order above these highs if you get taken out, and we wait and see from there. Delta Airlines, yeah, very confusing price action, as we've said, with all the airlines. I think potentially what you're going to see here is this is a big strong push up, and you might start to see this develop into a little bit of a running flat. So I'm still holding on to this as the trade for Delta and some of the other airlines as well, where we can look for this to pull back, and then all of this becomes a nice running flat for upside. So if we see this pull back, this will be a really nice buy. If not, we'll have to relook at the structure. If it follows Boeing's lines, we'll have to find a contracting flat in here somewhere. But for me, I like this as a nice choppy B wave, little C wave down towards $30, potentially a short still on the cards, just a bit more high risk. And if we do see this move down to 30, that's going to be a really nice buy and probably a long-term hold. If we look at the structure that's formed, just a running flat off the lows. This is your first impulse off the lows. So looking for that moving forward. Going to lower time frames, looking for a short. You're starting to see some MACD divergence, and probably anything breaking this trend line is worth a look in terms of a short. But like we said, the structure of the other airlines or of Boeing is a little bit confusing, has confused my picture of this trade. So you have to look at this in isolation, and in isolation, I still like the short down towards 30. DuPont, still looking for this move down, but potentially, like we said, it's a contracting flat. Otherwise, we're just looking for opportunities to get long, and it's potentially what we were looking at here is a little bit of a running flat for continuation to the upside. The price action looks like that's what it's doing. So yeah, I think we might even take this off the watch list fairly soon if we continue seeing new highs, as we've said, because it looks like it just wants to rally. It's kind of along the same lines as Mattel. If you don't remember Mattel, we were very bullish Mattel, seeing this choppy price action. Eventually, it just took off. We were saying just buy the stock outright, no margin, just hold on to it. And if you get a pullback, you just buy more. And that's been our strategy for DuPont and remains the strategy moving forward. Disney continuing to rally pretty strongly. We were looking to hopefully get a little bit of a pullback to match this on the lower time frames, to get a little bit of a running flat out of this. Potentially still going to see that, given how far we've come and the rest of the market looking fairly bearish, but pretty tricky from here. Ideally, you should have just been in at this from 117 and holding your position all the way through. That was what we called for initially. But looking to add on to the trade, if you do see a little bit of a dump towards 140, it's a risky long because we are pulling back from our median target, but the structure says more upside is available. So if we do see it, I still like the long from kind of 138 to add on to our position from 116. EA, still a choppy mess. I still think we're going to see downside, but more than likely what you're going to see from here is something a bit more corrective, and this becomes the first correction of this impulse. So that's your A wave, B wave down, another push up. That's an ABC running flat, hopefully, and then you see continuation to the downside. Zooming out, you can see how the structure is still holding up, and we haven't really done enough, in my view, to say this is over. So I think we're going to go see a break of 80 moving forward. You just need to be patient for this to break out. As you can see, wave A, pretty much a straight line, so we're getting the alternation we were expecting. Ford still holding on. I still think this is a structure that's going to play out. It's just being painful and taking painfully long to do so. If you look at the lower time frames, we started to see a little bit of a rising wedge type structure with some MACD divergence. So I still think the short trade is here for you once you see a break of this trend line. And the downside target is around about 750 to $7, somewhere in that region. Yeah, so like 732 is your full target. So looking for a nice long trade from there, but still waiting for this short trade. I don't see any other way. I don't see how this is a structure that closed out as a contracting flat. I just don't think the numbers are in there. So for now, I remain a Ford bull, full Ford bear. I still think we're going to see this pull back towards 730, and that's going to be a great buy. So good short and a good long moving forward. GDX, interesting trade to see what gold has done. This is a nice little A, B, C. If you look at this as a contract or a complex correction in the middle, and there's potentially a long trade available to you. Same with gold, where we're looking for our longs just to get clarification whether we've seen the lows. And this little impulse and then a little flag that's forming says to me that GDX may have also seen a low. And any break of this is probably worth a buy to the upside. In terms of length of correction, we haven't really done enough, which is a bit of a concern, which means you're only trading this impulse to the upside for your upside target. So look for kind of $50 as your high if we do start to see legs up from here. So again, too early to really say, but I think a buy of this little flag is worth it. GDXJ, same thing really. It'll push off the lows after an interesting zigzag corrected structure. And I think after this little flag on the lower time frames, you definitely want to buy a break of that. Goldman Sachs still rallying strongly up towards our full target. A really nice trade. We were excited about this one for a while, and it's nice to see it playing out as it is. Really clean price action, and we should continue just to see this rally all the way up. Halliburton, also another trade we were excited about. Our buy marker there looking pretty clean at $10, with the market now sitting at 1943. So very close to 100% return on this trade. And we should see a continuation rally at least up towards 24 with the way the oil market's looking at the moment. IBM, another one we were really happy with and still looks really good. I still think more upside. A little break of this flag is another buy opportunity that you're seeing right now, and we should see continuation up towards 150. Lockheed Martin kind of playing ball. Like we said, we were looking for a rally down towards 360 and a push up from here. Would have preferred just a straight up push, but we went straight into a corrected structure. I think entry order above these highs definitely worth a look. I really still think we're going to see this upside play out. Just have to be patient with it. This has been a really tricky one to trade, but just taken forever to play out in a fashion that we suspected. And I still think it is going to. Just need to be patient with it. Live Nation still in no man's land, still waiting for a move up towards 80 to 90, and then we can look for that short trade back down towards 30, 40, depending where we top out. MasterCard still an absolute mess, staying out of this one. Triple M still remaining a kind of stingy bear. I still think we're going to get this move down. Quite an interesting close over the last few days, which is potentially the start of a big move lower. But as you said, we've seen this before. It just remains chopping upwards. So I still think we're going to get this move. Like I said, I'm going to remain kind of headstrong on this one. And I still think down towards 150, 147 is going to be the move. And that's going to be a really nice buy. Moderna, not much to say really. If you don't see a bubble in this, then you have very interesting eyes. If you're in this, it's really risky. I still think there's going to be a big crash after something like this. At the very least, a long drawn out correction. So I would have taken profits and put them to work elsewhere by now. Morgan Stanley, like we said, another very nice trade that we were excited about, and that's just performed really nicely for us, approaching our full target. Starbucks, another one I'm remaining kind of hard-headed about. I still think we're going to see some downside from this 105 region down towards 85, potentially below 85 to complete a nice running flat structure. Pretty long drawn out corrective structure and quite bullish, but I still think we're going to see some downside on this one. If we go into the lower time frames, more than likely starting to see some divergence on the MACD, which is a good sign for what we're looking for. So yeah, it's been a difficult one to trade, but like I said, I'm not really interested in the short given the upside momentum. I'd rather see the dip down towards 85 and then buy that to the upside, because that's going to be a much better trade. Very much along the same lines as Twitter, just taking a lot longer. As you saw with Twitter, we just had a long push up and then eventually we saw a big drop, and that's all become one big structure, and now we're looking for those long trades to the upside. And it looks like it does want to march up. I still want to see this move down, and then we can basically get our running flat. If you look at the lower time frames, it's basically a reproduction of the higher time frame trade, where you're looking for a pullback and it just chop up, and then only you got your pullback. So we had our pullback, a long chop up, waiting patiently for a pullback, and I still think we're going to get that towards 44, which we can then trade up from there. Visa, chopping around. I still think more upside before we get the big short. The structure still looks really good. It's just taking a long time to play out. So I'm actually going to take Visa and MasterCard off the watch list for now. And might as well take EA as well, because we're just going to be sideways for the next month or two. Where was I? Verizon. Still looking good. Still think we're going to see a little bit of a dip, and then that's going to be a really great buying opportunity up towards $70. If you look at the lower time frames, you can see it's a really nice, clean, running flat potential to get long from there. We might go break the lows again first, and then see them dip down, or we've already started the dip, but I still think that dip's going to come. And when you see that dip, you definitely want to buy it. ExxonMobil, another one we're pretty happy with, pulling off really nicely off these lows, up from 31 towards 41, and we should see this continue to the upside up towards our full target, which is going to break 56 in my view. So really liking this trade to the upside, performing really well. American Airlines, another one that's been confusing. Depends how you're going to look at it. Are you going to look at it like the others, where this is your A wave, this is a chop up, and eventually this is going to turn to the downside as a C wave, and all of this just becomes a running flat for more upside? It's an absolute mess at the moment. So you have to just wait and see. The alternative is what we're looking at is this trade still, the short trade still there. But given that other airlines are looking pretty bullish, it's hard. These airline stocks have just been a nightmare to trade. One of them showing one picture, the other's showing a different picture. It's just been really confusing. We are getting some MACD divergence on the hourly. We said entry order below here, which didn't trigger. For now, I'm staying out of this until we get a decent, something that looks similar to this, where you get a dip down and then a correction, and then you can put an entry order below those lows to trade to the downside. But for now, I'm on the outside. There's better opportunities on the cards. Abbott Labs pushing nicely down towards our buy zone at about $100. Patiently waiting for that. Deutsche Bank still rallying strongly, still performing well for us. I still think there's more upside to come on that. Johnson & Johnson, like we said, we were looking for a dip down to close this gap. Gave us a nice expanding flat. It's exactly what we got, and now we've pushed off those lows. This was a nice buy here, nice flag to buy to the upside. Otherwise, entry order above these highs, I think will still perform well, as this bigger structure is at least $180 upside target. So still looking good, still some good juice left in the lemon. Ross Stores, I still think we're going to see some downside, although it does look like it wants to break the highs again. I still think this is going to play out as a nice big running flat, given the structure that we're looking at. So patiently waiting for a pullback. Like I said, I'm not interested in the short too much. I'm more interested in the long down from this region at around about 90 to 95. So waiting for that pullback. AT&T still pushing up nicely for us. We were looking for this to give us a little E wave, which is this one here, ABCDE. Nice little structure and continuation to the upside from here. So everyone else is bearish AT&T. We still think there's some upside to come up towards 32 to 34 before that downside leg comes. So happy with that long. Draftkings, another long trade that we're very happy with, performing really well. And a little bit of a pullback. I think this is just corrective for more upside. Don't see much of a structure here. This could just be the first correction of this big impulse, which means we may be here for a little while before the next leg up. Just have to see how this A wave plays out. But given the crossover that we're seeing on the MACD, you're probably going to get something along these lines before continuation to the upside. But the structure is still looking really good for a move up to at least 70 moving forward. Tesla doing Tesla things. You really have to look at this as either a triangle, which means you are only correcting this little impulse here, which means we are fairly close to our full target before we see a big correction. I'm more inclined to think that this is going to still pull back at some point, and all of this is just going to play out as one big complex corrective structure. But obviously, if we continue to see new highs, we're going to have to relook at it. I don't like anything in terms of a trade here. I would prefer a move down towards this region to get long. The structure, yeah, it's kind of confusing. Given the length that we need, it's more likely that this is actually a triangle if we look at it that way, which means we're close to the target, and only then are we going to go into a long correction. So, yeah, like I said, Tesla doing Tesla things. I was hoping for more of a long, drawn-out correction, and then a nice buy at 350 for a much bigger move, probably a doubling of the stock up towards 600. But this is starting to look like more of a blow-off top for a much bigger correction moving forward. So, have to wait and see. Bank of America, nice push up, choppy corrective price action. I think what we are looking at is probably a move down to come, something along these lines. And that's going to be a nice buy from here, because that's basically correcting this as your first impulse off the lows. A choppy B, C wave down, that's going to be a nice buy from that region. So potentially looking for a short trade from up here, and then a nice long trade from 23.24. If we go into the hourlies, started to see a little bit of a rising wedge type structure, which good potential for a turnaround in this market. So basically any break of this trend line is probably worth a look. As you can see, it is a nice rising wedge with dying momentum, and the structure matches that. So fairly decent short possibility moving forward. Cameco Corp, the uranium play, we just came out of a very nice ABCDE expanding triangle, very strong bullish close, which means the structure has kind of confirmed itself. We were looking for, like we said, a push, a rounding close up, a nice push down, which is this one here, and that would have been your buy. If you wanted to look at it at a lower time frame, you can see that there was a really nice running flat, quite a contracting running flat, but a running flat nonetheless, which would have been a perfect buy order above these highs, which have really been performing really well. If you're not in this trade, you want to look for a decent corrective structure to trade to the upside, or you can start to look for longs with an stop loss below these lows, so much wider stop loss. Zooming out, you can see why this is such a nice trade, because we are looking for quite a strong move now up towards at least 35, 30 to 35 region. So we are only down to 11, so we can see a tripling of the stock over kind of the next year or two So we really like this as a play moving forward. Definitely worth trying to find an entry on the lower time frames. So pretty textbook. This is your first impulse. Expanding triangle, which isn't the best first corrective structure on the lower degree, but that's what it was. And now we're seeing a nice push up from there. Salesforce put back on the list because we did eventually get the structure we were looking for. We were looking for this to rally down towards a closing of this 218 gap, which is exactly what we've got. So we've seen a corrective structure, impulse down, A, B, C, flat pattern. I'm just going to have to change it towards something like that. And now we've seen a rally down. So we can start to look for long trades in Salesforce moving forward. There is a possibility that all of this was just your A wave, and the long from here is just going to be a slow, steady chop back up to the highs. But if you can get it at a good level, the choppiness should be worth holding on to. Maybe just worth holding the stock rather than a leverage position is probably a better place to, a better way to play this moving forward. FireEye, starting to see a fairly decent corrective structure in this. What I think is going to happen here is all of this is going to play out as a running triangle, which means you could see quite a strong push up from this region. And then once you break these highs, another push back down, and that's going to give you a nice ABC running flat following this impulse up. So some decent looking price action. The long is kind of risky. It is there, but it's a little bit risky given that it's part of the central corrective structure. I'm more interested in the short trade once we see a closing off of that, and then the long trade once we see the C wave complete. So I like both of these trades. The long trade is a bit risky, but basically we've got quite a nice looking flag here, which is worth looking at. Kind of matches an A, B, C, D, E, sorry, impulse A, B, C, D, E correction, and then an impulse up from there. So it's a decent structure at the end of a decent structure, at the end of a much bigger decent structure. So maybe worth a look if you're interested. But I'm more inclined to look for the more stable trades, like the short trade from around about 17 downwards. That is Spirit Airlines to the mix. If we zoom out, you can see of the airlines, this is actually now starting to look like the more attractive bet. Fairly along the same lines as Delta, where we can start to see this push down once we see the break of the highs. So kind of from 27.50 down towards 15, and that's going to be an ABC running flat for more upside. So short trade, if you start to see a little bit of a turn to the downside, probably worth taking given the structure and given the downside potential of that trade and the downside speed that might come with it. I think that's worth a look. And finally, Seagate Technologies. I've added this to the list because of the higher time frame structure, where we're really starting to look for a short trade. As you can see, a really clean corrective structure, which is going to be a little bit bigger. So what I see here is an impulse up, A, B, C, D, E, expanding triangle. It's been a little bit confusing, but it is there. And now we are seeing the second impulse up. Once we see a break of these highs, you're going to want to look for the move down. It might be a choppy move down, so you want to try get as close to the highs as you can and to hold that for a while. But the trade down should be really nice. As you can see, you're looking from around about a $70 entry all the way down towards 23 to 30. So that's a really nice short trade that's available to us moving forward. And that's it. That's our watch list for the month. As you can see, a lot of bearish, at least in the short term, some bearish trades still on the cards. Basically the same as Thursday's update and the Monday before that. We're still just patiently waiting for the S&P to pull back and a lot of equities to fall alongside that before looking for that buy, which is kind of the same story for a lot of the trades. In terms of trades that stand out to me, I still like the forward short. I think GDX long is definitely worth a look given where we're sitting. It's not my favorite trade, but it is worth looking at in terms of where gold is sitting. A lot of our trades are already on the run, like Goldman Sachs, Halliburton, IBM. Lockheed Martin is worth a look. So it's really not a very clean structure, but I think the upside is still there. If we zoom into the lower time frames, I still think we're going to see a nice push up towards the highs of 417. I still think 3M is going to pull back. Stubbornly waiting for that. If Starbucks pulls back, that's really good. If you start to see a turn to the downside, the Starbucks short is maybe worth a look. I still like the Twitter long. If we can see a short pullback in that. I still like energy moving forward. If you can find an entry, I still think there's more some upside there available to us. I still like Abbott Labs long from the $100 region, following the little pullback which matches the rest of the market. I still like Ross down at 90 if we can see that pullback. So a lot of these are just pullback to buy the dip type positions. I still like Draftkings to the upside if you can find a good entry. And Tesla's doing Tesla things, like I said. And I like Save. I like a Save short. Basically between Save and Delta, for some reason I like Save more, but Delta also looks really good. Expect a very similar price action between the two. So yeah, short Airlines looks like a good trade if the market starts to pull back. Cool guys, that's it. Have a great December, have a great festive season, and we will chat in the new year.